Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, taking Trump's vision to turn Gaza into a Riviera seriously.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too.
It would mean the forced removal of millions of Palestinians. So is it fantasy or a sign of what's to come? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. U.S. President Donald Trump stunned not just the world, but even those within his own circle this week. During his joint press conference with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C., he proposed taking control of the Gaza Strip. He suggested relocating 1.8 million Palestinians and redeveloping the land into what he called the Riviera of the Middle East.
Gaza is a hellhole right now. It was before the bombing started, frankly. And we're going to give people a chance to live in a beautiful community that's safe and secure.
Then, on Thursday, he laid it out. On Truth Social, he explained that Israel would turn over the Gaza Strip to the U.S. at the, quote, conclusion of fighting. No U.S. soldiers would be needed. If you still have questions about how in the world something like this would play out, you're not alone. My guest today has been covering the U.S. involvement in the Middle East for years and is going to help us sort through this.
This is a region that has been suffering for over 70 years. A lot of what this region suffers is because of Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. This has destabilized the region for over half a century. And so to do it again, I don't think anyone is willing to go along with that. My name is Sharif Kouddous. I'm currently working as a journalist and the Middle East North Africa editor at Dropside News. I went to Gaza many times, I went to the West Bank many times, went to Syria, went to Yemen, Libya. And a couple of years ago, I moved back to New York and have been freelancing from here.
Wow. Okay. Well, Sharif, I can't think of a better person to talk to now that Trump says the U.S. is back in the nation-building business. I was thinking rather than spending our time going through the normal Trump outrage cycle that usually ends with us assuming this is probably all just talk or that his advisor's clarification afterwards is actually the real window into his thoughts. Instead, why don't we just take Trump at his word and let's take him literally and seriously and try to game plan this out a little bit. So I was thinking as an exercise, say the United States actually wants to occupy and clear out Gaza. What are the steps that would need to happen to do that?
Well, it's a very hard scenario to imagine. We can talk about this, but first of all, you would have to have countries willing to accept over 2 million Palestinians. Already these countries, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, have rejected this idea very, very strongly. But okay, say you imagine that you're going to build refugee camps in northern Sinai, that you're going to somehow house more Palestinians in Jordan. Already Palestinians make up 2/3 of the population in Jordan. Or find other countries to take Palestinians. Okay, so you're going to somehow set that up. Then, what is most unrealistic about this is that you're going to somehow convince or force 2 million Palestinians who have withstood 15 months of a genocidal assault, and you're going to somehow force them out. How are you going to do this? Mm-hmm. They have undergone months of relentless and almost unprecedented aerial bombardment. Every part of civilian life has been attacked: schools, hospitals, all kinds of bakeries, civilian infrastructure, and they stayed on their land. That wasn't enough to get them out. And I don't know, you're going to have to somehow force them out. So this is why it's even hard to imagine this scenario and take this seriously.
You said that Egypt wants no part of this. Can you just say more about that? Why exactly this is a complete non-starter for Egypt?
For many reasons, Egypt doesn't want this. The president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, speaks in terms of the Palestinian cause and that, the Palestinians can't be displaced from their land. But I think it's much more for him about national security.
I say that if I ask the Egyptian people to do this, they will all go out to the streets to say no, do not participate in injustice. I say it very clearly. The deportation or displacement of the Palestinian people is an act of injustice in which we cannot participate.
The Egyptian government does not want a large, restive Palestinian population on its land, which it can then use to launch resistance attacks against Israel. This is what we saw historically in Jordan, in Lebanon. Those countries were very much destabilized by Palestinians engaging in resistance and having their base of resistance there. So there's no way Egypt would accept that. Yeah. And, I think a lot of people are forgetting when we're having this conversation is that soon after October 7th, just weeks into Israel's attack on Gaza, the Biden administration, the United States, and other European countries tried to convince Egypt to open the gates and allow in for the mass displacement of Palestinians. And they offered economic incentives to Egypt to do this. And Egypt was and still is undergoing a very severe economic crisis. And so this was their way of trying to execute a very similar plan. It failed. And even we saw Sisi and the King of Jordan, Abdullah, cancel a meeting with Biden. He was supposed to fly to the region. There was supposed to be a summit, and they refused to meet with him after that. So this seems to be a rehash of it. It's just that Trump is saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah, exactly. So there is also the security element of this. I mean, you almost forget that the point of this war from the Israeli perspective was supposed to be eradicating Hamas. Well, that didn't happen. Hamas is very much still running things in the Gaza Strip. I mean, the resistance that would happen not just on behalf of Hamas, but on behalf of all of people living in Gaza to fight against this clearing of the Gaza Strip. I mean, that would be a battle that would probably be even more significant than the one we just saw. Fair?
I imagine so. And look, let's remember that 80% of the people in Gaza are not from Gaza. These are refugees. They're people or their descendants who came from the villages and towns that actually surround Gaza. Okay, and so that's why the Gaza Strip has for decades been, firstly, the place where Palestinian resistance and the Palestinian cause is really at the heart of the place. It's where the first Intifada began. It's where Yasser Arafat launched Fatah. It's where Hamas was formed. This all came out of the Gaza Strip because it is the largest concentration of Palestinian refugees in historic Palestine. And so these are people who want to go back to their homes, back to their land that they were expelled from in 1948. So it has long been a problem for Israel, and Israel has always dealt with Gaza harshly. It has been under blockade much longer than just since 2006 and in various forms. There's been plans to ethnically cleanse Gaza from Israel dating back to the 1950s, because it's this restive place where you have a large population of refugees. And so, this idea that after everything that's happened and they were unable with a ground invasion and with massive aerial assault and with the commission of what the International Criminal Court has said is a plausible case of genocide, you still weren't able to clear people off their land. It's very hard to imagine how the US or anyone else is going to force, 2 million people off their land.
Yeah, we're seeing there's a bit of backtracking now from the White House.
The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza.
We've heard no boots on the ground, but that would just preclude U.S. military, not U.S. security personnel, I guess. We know that there are private military contractors who are currently manning checkpoints in Gaza. If this thought experiment does play out, could this be the workaround? How much of this do you think could be outsourced?
Well, it's hard to know. It also falls into like a wider kind of philosophy of the privatization of war in many ways. I mean, 1 week into the ceasefire agreement, the Israeli troops were going to withdraw from what's called the Netzarim corridor. So the Netzarim corridor was set up a few weeks and months into the war. And this is basically a 6 or 7 kilometer stretch of land that bisects Gaza, right? So it was an area where the Israeli military went in. They completely ethnically cleansed that strip of land near Wadi Gaza in the middle of Gaza. They completely destroyed everything that was there and set up military bases. So what happened was that there was a deal that the people who were going to man this crossing after the Israelis withdrew would be private contractors. And this would be US security contractors, as well as Egyptian security contractors. But the US security contractors, there's little known about these firms. The information about them is quite opaque. But what we do know is that the money being offered, which is usually the case with private military contractors, is extremely high, a very high daily rate for former Marines or CIA operatives to man this area in Gaza. And so we're seeing them now. We've seen photos of them on the ground. They're the ones who are inspecting Palestinians who are returning to the north in cars. As a long-term project of having, private contractors, boots on the ground in that way, it's very hard to say what's plausible at this point.
Yeah, I think the point is that if they do want to try to clear the Gaza Strip, it's going to take a lot of work, and the Israelis are going to need help. I mean, the Israeli military is relatively depleted too. So this private contractor angle is something I just think we need to keep our eye on. We'll have more with Sharif after the break. Sharif, none of this is a game, obviously, and Palestinians don't want to leave, right? We did an episode last week with one of our reporters, Maram Humaid, who lives in Gaza, and she traveled with the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who crossed the Netzarim corridor and returned to the north and what is left of their homes.
I saw people men, women, children, kids, elderlies, all of them, they were holding their belongings and walking on foot towards the north of Gaza.
From her reporting and her own personal story, it's clear there is no appetite to leave.
When they are back to their homes and feeling that they are inhaling the same, breathing the air of their lands, it would be it would be lighter on them.
People are putting up tents on top of the rubble of their destroyed homes. I wonder how you square this with what we're hearing from the Trump White House, that moving Palestinians out is for their own good.
I mean, first of all, that kind of rhetoric for their own good, that they know what's better for Palestinians and Palestinians themselves, I think is deeply problematic, of course. But there is a reality that has to be confronted, that it seems to have been the goal of the Israeli military to make Gaza uninhabitable. I mean, there was a UN report that came out in 2018 that said Gaza would become uninhabitable by 2020 because of the severe blockade Israel had placed it under for so many years and the successive wars it had conducted on Gaza. That's before this genocidal assault. But now there really is nothing to sustain life there. The farms have been razed, bulldozed up. There's nowhere to live. Almost all of the housing has been either completely destroyed or severely damaged. No bakeries, there's no schools, there's no hospitals really functioning.
So they intentionally destroy Gaza and then use the fact that it's destroyed as justification for clearing Gaza.
And we just saw the Israeli defense minister say he's ordered the military to make preparations to facilitate the emigration of large numbers of Palestinians from Gaza through land crossings, or even said by sea or by air. I think they would be very happy if there was this voluntary emigration. If they can prevent any kind of semblance of life returning, then I think, some Palestinians will choose to leave. And don't get me wrong, Palestinians should have the option to leave if they want to go and take their families somewhere and they have an opportunity somewhere. Of course, they should be allowed to. They shouldn't be prisoners in this place, but they shouldn't be forced to either.
Yeah.
Yes, there is this very heroic display of resilience of people returning, setting up tents on the rubble of their homes. But unless the international community, and there's like a real push to allow in, there's nowhere else in the world where there's like a quota of how much aid is allowed to go into a place, right? Yeah. There is in Gaza, but there should just be, if they're going to be able to stay there, then there does have to be a massive effort of aid coming in, of rebuilding. There's estimates that, it's going to take years just to remove the rubble itself. There's tons and tons of unexploded ordnance that's there mixed in with the rubble and the remains of people. It's, it is a hellish landscape that Israel has created there.
Trump had been hinting about his plans for Gaza for a while now, up until his statement about owning Gaza. He said several times that Gaza has great potential, it has great weather, and then you add that to what his son-in-law Jared Kushner said last year, describing Gaza as, quote, very valuable waterfront property. Knowing that this has been in the works, should we be surprised, really, that this is where we ended up?
I mean, this kind of language it's not that surprising, and this kind of worldview. I mean, let's remember, we can look back to how Trump dealt with Palestine in his first administration. And he, moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem at the time, which was a move that sparked massive protests, mostly in Gaza. Trump also issued what he called the deal of the century, to resolve the Israel-Palestine, what he called conflict. And it was laughable, what was offered and was put on the table for Palestinians. So, he certainly is a very pro-Israel figure. And using this kind of language, him and Jared Kushner is looking at the world as a big real estate deal and commodifying everything, and it goes to the highest bidder. This is a guy who has the richest man in the world by his side doing his bidding as well.
Yeah, I mean, Kushner on Wednesday, he doubled his stake in an Israeli financial firm that stands to gain from turbocharging Israeli settlements in Palestine. I mean, this is just before the announcement.
Kushner and his father were personally close to Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, this was a friendship, like when he used to come visit the United States, would stay with them. That's how close Kushner is to them. And let's not forget, Benjamin Netanyahu now is an international fugitive. For him to arrive in Washington, he had to fly through Greek, Italian, and French airspace. And to the discredit of these countries, they just ignored the arrest warrants of the International Criminal Court and allowed him to go through the airspace. Apparently, Netanyahu gets a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Well, the reporting says that Benjamin Netanyahu and his team are delighted by how this White House visit played out. He praised Trump for his outside-of-the-box thinking. I'm wondering what you make of this, because to me, it only highlights the fact that there is no inside-the-box thinking at all. Almost a year and a half into this conflict, have you heard a single realistic plan for a post-war Gaza?
Not from the United States or Israel. I think there's been a lot of good proposals by Palestinians and by others about what needs to happen in Gaza. But, I think it's hard to understand that there was tension between Netanyahu and President Biden. And we kept hearing these leaks in the press that Biden spoke very harshly with Netanyahu over things like not invading Rafah and so forth. But the Biden administration fully armed, supported, and facilitated this assault on Gaza. It allowed Netanyahu to cross all of these so-called red lines without any real consequence in terms of weapons shipments or anything of the sort. And in fact, the only time that the ceasefire came in place, I think it is thanks to President Trump. He wanted some kind of ceasefire as a notch on his belt when he was inaugurated, and his envoy, Stephen Witkoff, did push it through. I think we have to acknowledge that. But at the same time now, Netanyahu looks like the Cheshire cat sitting there next to Trump, just beaming ear to ear, because Trump is saying things no one would dare say, saying that all of them have to leave Gaza. This is exactly what Israel wants, what someone like Benjamin Netanyahu wants. It has always been about territorial expansion. It has always been about ethnic cleansing. This dates back decades. It's not just people like Benjamin Netanyahu. There's been Israeli plans like this on the table for a very long time. His ministers, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, say it out loud as well. But for him to be sitting in the White House next to the U.S. president is saying they all need to leave. He just looked like the cat that caught the cream.
It also took pressure off of him. No one's asking him what his plan is for a post-war Gaza. And there is none. I mean, that was what they were supposed to be talking about, is what is phase 2 of the ceasefire supposed to look like? And now we have this plan that we just went through and seems really unfeasible, but there is no alternative that they're proposing, because there's no space politically in Israel for anything that has any sort of concessions for Palestinians, right?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with you. I mean, all successive Israeli governments from the Labour Party or Likud are Zionist, and they've all engaged in settlement building and all these sort of things. But the difference with this government, which has, pretty much self-declared fascists in it, they have said blatantly that they want to resettle Gaza. That they've had settler conferences talking about resettling Gaza and kicking the population out. And so, no, there is no domestic opportunity for anything. I mean, it was very hard to even get this meager phase 1 ceasefire in place. And I think, what a lot of people aren't talking about at all, and I think we should be talking about, is what's happening in the West Bank. As soon as this ceasefire went into effect, 2 days later, Israel launched what's called Operation Iron Wall, which is basically declared war on the West Bank. And this appears to be, from reporting, a trade-off that Netanyahu got people like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to sign on to phase 1 of this deal. In return, they would launch this attack on the West Bank. So no, I think we're in a very difficult place, and who knows what's going to happen with phase 2, which involve the release of very high-value captives on both sides, and then talking about the rebuilding of Gaza and the end of the war on a permanent basis. I don't think Netanyahu or Trump necessarily want that. I think it's also hard for me to imagine it going back to the level of killing that we saw for 15 months, given that we've had this long pause now and people have returned to the north. But, I don't know. We had a ceasefire in November for a week, and then when the war resumed, it got much worse. So
right. I mean, what's more realistic, that level of killing or them actually coming to some sort of accommodation? I don't know. I can't see either happening, but it's also horrible. Okay. Sharif, thank you for coming on The Take today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's The Take. What are your thoughts on Trump's Riviera plan for Gaza? Drop a comment below and let us know what you think. And as always, we're listening to your feedback on the show. Tell us what episodes you'd like more of and what you thought of this one. We read every comment, so don't hold back.